Speaking of which, I'm really hyped to know that you're going to see that soon. So I'm sure that we'll
Yeah,
have to
yes,
speak
I
about it afterwards.
promise I will see the movie
I
soon.
know you. I don't doubt it. I'm just saying I'm excited for when you do. Like,
No, the
I
reason I
thought
say
like,
that is because I was ordering a pizza at Domino's the other day, and for whatever reason, the cashier was like trying to scan the barcode, and we're sitting there awkwardly for like 2 minutes, and he's just scanning and it's not working, and it's just like, isn't it great when isn't technology great?
yeah, I know, right? Like, fuck.
Okay,
Yeah, don't blame you.
okay. So we're now recording. So I'm just gonna say, hello everybody. This is Jesse. I'm the voice and creator of North Korea Uncovered, and with me here today is Alex. Alex is the guy that makes sure my scripts aren't dog shit, and also helps me do a lot of research and things like that. He's just as knowledgeable on this topic as I am. You've definitely read and listened to his words, even if you've never actually heard his voice until now. So I would like to say, Alex, thank you for being here with me today.
Yeah, thanks, dog. I'm always happy to be here, and I do think people have heard my voice because we did do that Yeonmi Park stream forever and a day ago. So
Oh,
they
you know
may have,
what? You know what? You're right. Yeah. Okay.
but that's okay. Like if they haven't heard us in a while, then well, if you didn't hear my voice before, you might be sick of it very soon. So let's have a interesting chat today. A lot of things have developed in the world of the DPRK. It's been a long time since we've been able to talk about this. I think Yeonmi Park might have gotten more plastic since the last time we talked, if that was even possible.
Oh my God.
But
Okay.
yeah,
We'll try and let's try and avoid throwing shade as much as we might want to, because well, so as with any sort of podcast esque sort of video, it's naturally predated by 20 minutes of banter before we get onto the proper topic at hand. So I just wanted to mainly talk about like why I've kind of been away from the channel, because this channel is 6 years old now. Just recently, I was going back to my first upload, and my first upload of the a broad bellflower was May of 2018. So that's it. It's
that's
been,
coming up on 7, isn't
yeah,
it?
yeah, coming up on 7 years, and like looking back, it's crazy to think that I would still even be doing this now, because 2018, I don't know what you were doing in 2018, man, because we didn't meet until the pandemic, but I I was just like barely in college at that time, not really taking it too terribly seriously, right?
Yes, at that point in time, I believe that I was working as a rent-a-cop, kicking drunk people out of bars.
There we
So life has definitely come a long way since then.
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah. And so,
So
I mean, the primary purpose of this channel, of course, was just to try and explore North Korean culture through something as as apolitical as one could possibly be with a topic like North Korea, right? So I mean, but as time progressed, obviously, I did 20 movie reviews over the course of like I want to say 3 years. I want to say it's been a good three, almost 4 years since I've done a movie review. And the reason why I stopped, of course, is just because like it was just more or less watching the same thing over and over and over again. Like there was even with like the more out there films like Hong Kil Dong or Burgasari, like none of them really broke any actual molds. Like they had an interesting veneer over them, right? But they were still fundamentally socialist realist films, and like it just got very tedious doing the same thing over and over again.
I don't blame you at all because the issue I think with these, they really do melt your brain after a while, and you know, people have the belief that North Koreans are sort of brainwashed, but Paper Will, obviously, in the interim since we've been here, has done that just sort of comprehensive review of all North Korean media ever. And he wasn't able to do quite everything because I think that there's some stuff that you just can't even access in the West.
Yeah.
But he did about as comprehensive of a read and of a research deep dive as you could. And he agrees these things suck. And it's funny because I think he brought it up in his video, but it's also very clear if you talk to defectors, if you look at testimonies, if you look at histories of the subject. North Koreans also know that these things suck. They're not dumb.
Yeah, dude,
Things are entertaining or they're not, and they know that they suck.
yes, dude, 100%. Yeah, because in the years past, whenever I actually talked to a few North Korean defectors, I did actually have the chance. This was like soon after the channel started. I think I posted on a comment on someone's video, like, hey, like, I talk about these type of North Korean movies. Like, do you have any, what do you think of them? I think she said something to the effect is that, like, yeah, I watched some of them, and yeah, they're terrible. I didn't get anything else out of her, so it's like, yeah, I don't think anybody is pleased with these types of things. They exist to push a narrative of Juche socialist values, and pretty much that's it. It serves a purpose, and it's not even chiefly entertainment.
No, these are really bad as entertainment. It's in some ways, it's kind of funny because when you watch these, I don't think you could even do the mystery science theater thing where you heckle them because you just get bored within
Yeah,
about
dude.
30 minutes.
Dude,
Just
yeah, because I know I've like floated that idea around with you in the past, but it's just like, yeah, dude, like it wouldn't even be fun. We'd just be drinking just for the sake of drinking and just talking about off-topic shit, because like movie wouldn't capture your attention at all.
Yes, no, it's difficult to stay focused, especially because you can sort of see the plot coming and hitting you in the face. I think some of these films, I think there's a couple, some of the newer ones, and they veneer at the precipice of being watchable. Not good, not entertaining, but sort of watchable. So, Paper Wheel, for example, he hated Flower Girl. You liked Flower Girl. I think Flower Girl is one of those films that is on the veneer of watchable. It's
Flower
sort of,
Girl actually is watchable. I think that's probably the
yes.
most watchable of them. I will say I don't hate Abroad Bellflower. Actually, I chose that as my first for a reason. But I understand most people would think it's unwatchable. I like it simply because I think it has actually really good acting for a North Korean film, which is kind of few and far between. And
Yes.
I do like that it presents the sort of socialist idea of, hey, I'm this strict Stakhanovite woman who does as the party commands, and that means, of course, being content with the role I was given in my life. And I do think that towards the end, when I'm going off topic here, but like towards the end, whenever like she breaks up with her boyfriend or whatever, is like, I'm sorry, I can't go with you to the city. I have an obligation to my nation to farm. It's like, hey, like there's actually some weight in that scene, because it's like it's pretty well done. That's all I'll say. I do like that one, but it is still, of course, a North Korean film.
Yes, absolutely. And that's what I was going to say. I think in terms of newer releases, I think Comrade Kim Goes Flying, which I think was right at the beginning of the Kim Jong Un era. It was a couple years after he had taken the throne. I think that's also sort of watchable. It has jokes that are actually, they'll make you crack a smile. They're not laugh out loud funny, but they're sort of cute. But again, it's really bizarre seeing how some of these plots sort of fit into really Soviet sort of short films you might have seen in the Stalin era. It's sort of like they haven't even evolved in the 100 years or so since those were popular, or like the 80 years since those were popular.
Yeah,
Because they're just. But the problem is that whereas those shorts from the Stalin era were really just that, they were just literally short videos, these are feature lengths, and they're trying to lengthen something that was pretty much unbearable to watch even back then.
totally. And you know, a Comrade Kim Goes Flying was something I was requested to review a lot, and I don't know why I never got around to it. But yeah, I don't know. Not gonna promise I'm gonna watch it and do a review on it, because even though it's been years, like I can't. It's so hard for me to watch these things now. We'll see. But I mean, I'm sure.
Oh,
I mean, that was covered in Paper Will's video, anyways. So it's like, which
I mean, the issue is that he has now done it all, and he's sort of given such a good
exactly, yeah, and it's like,
outline of it.
you and I both helped him with that project. In fact, we played a pretty instrumental role in ensuring that it was a pretty nuanced take of North Korea. So it's like this kind of transitioned into another reason why there hasn't been a ton of content from us lately. It's just that one of my goals when I set out to do this channel, and I did have a goal, believe it or not, was to affect the sort of, or sort of add to the zeitgeist, so to speak, to add some nuance around topics discussed, related to North Korea. And I feel like that was kind of done with Paper Will's channel because obviously he's a very successful YouTuber with millions of subscribers. He has extraordinary reach, and like for him to do like a 3-hour video, I think it was something like that, to have been a part of that and to have helped him with research and things like that, it's like, that's kind of like the crowning achievement that I set out to do, right? So
5.5 hours.
5.5. Okay, dude, it's even longer than I remember. Yeah, because
Yes, and I think the manuscript of the script was something in the vicinity of 40 to 60,000 words. Don't quote me on that; it might have been longer.
yeah,
But
because
yeah,
you proofread the script, right? Because I just did more of the research and like the translations and shit like that. I think you were more of like the script.
yeah. As I said, it was long. Like I think I spent a couple days just dedicatedly doing nothing but reading it and just like looking at the text, working on it. So, it was an interesting, as I said, it was a very interesting situation. It was a lot of fun doing it. I think it was just such a good chance to talk about the DPRK. But, I think we'll get more into it as we get into the context of this episode, for this show. But in some ways, that video and sort of that moment was a crowning moment in maybe the last times that we as outsiders, as Westerners, will have a particularly good view into North Korea. The state is going to continue to exist. It's going to continue having its own roles and interests as it goes forward. But, it is effectively closed to most Westerners now. And its policy has shifted drastically. They're not even living on the illusion of reunification. They're not even living on the illusion of sort of being the same as the South. And the prophecy of Andrei Lankov, I remember he had an article that was getting some flack. I think it was in 2021. It was during the pandemic, where he said, the North and South are never reunifying, and the sooner that people sort of stop this charade or this pretension that is even a possibility, the sooner everybody will be a bit happier. And well, that is now the case. And the person that broke that bad news to everybody else was the North. So
Yeah, totally. Yeah, transitioning into this topic. One of because people have been asking me left and right, over the past couple of years, like, when are you gonna cover like these like bombshell revelations coming out of North Korea, like, like ever since COVID, because I mean, people were asking me about the situation about COVID in the North, and the reason I didn't really make a video on it is like, well, insofar as dealing with COVID, I don't feel like North Korea did really anything drastic that other countries didn't do. I mean, they shut down, they quarantined people, and they disinfected their public transit terminals. Like, to me, that was like, there wasn't really a lot to talk about that was any different from South Korea, because South Korea also had equally very draconian measures to deal with COVID. And
all
so,
of the East Asian Confucian cultural group societies had very dramatic and drastic shutdowns. I think the case for North Korea, the reason it was so unique was the fact that their sanctions lasted longer than other countries. For the purposes of saving face, they had to affect that they had not felt the effects of the virus and pretend officially that people just hadn't had it. Everybody's wearing masks, but nobody has COVID, of course. And the most dramatic step that they took was that they kept the border shut, and that kept imports out. And as we know, the experiment with autarky and total self-reliance is something that exists in propaganda, not in reality. And so that meant that they suffered extremely draconianly as a result of the self-imposed shutdown. They couldn't bring in anything that they needed. It was very difficult for them to maintain the status quo. And they I don't think that they've recovered, honestly, from COVID at all. So from what we're seeing from the inside. So that was why it was such an interesting case, because the shutdown happened and they have really only started to open up again to people like foreign tourists in the past year, I want to say. So
yeah, I think it was the beginning of last year, or late 2023, that they finally started to open up, because I know I asked you about it because I know for a long time you've been wanting to make plans to go to the North, but
yes, and honestly, now I don't even know if it would be a good plan. It's not just a question of personal safety; it's a question of the heightening geopolitical tensions could potentially lead to problems down the road if we're going there. Because before, this was sort of seen as a hostile state that we tolerate for the purposes of dialogue, and now I think it's being much more seen as that Cold War era of a completely hostile state that we don't even sort of enjoy tolerating.
Right, right. And so yeah, the most interesting development, and that was of course North Korea destroying, like, the reunification monument, and stating publicly that, yeah, reunification is no longer, its prime, its prerogative, right? And the reason I didn't comment on this at the time was that, North Korea is a country that's kind of known for making like sudden brash statements and then sort of reneging on them the moment they get, whether it's a form of aid or diplomatic talks or whatever. Like, it's the North Korea cycle. We all know what it is. They'll fire off some missiles, they'll act fiery, there will be some diplomatic back and forth or something, and then things are good until next year or so on. So, like, I was sort of under the impression that, like, I don't want to make a statement so soon and then just have it be, like, completely contradicted in, like, 6 months. So it's like, you could say that's a cop out, but, like, I really did kind of want to see the dust settle a little bit. And because people were saying, like, oh, they destroyed I think it was the monument, the arch, the one of the two women holding up the unified Korean peninsula. I forget what it's called. Um, yeah, they blew up that monument, and people were like, oh my god, like, that's a huge step. And it's like, well, I mean, that monument's only been there since I think 2000, and for all you youngins, 2000 might seem like a long time ago, but, like, it's not too long ago. So, but I mean, as we've seen now, like, yeah, they've stuck by this decision publicly. I mean, reunification is no longer their stated goal. So I mean, this is a new sort of watershed moment in North Korean history.
Yes, I agree, and I think the reason for that is that just that sort of official narrative couldn't stand together anymore. There was no reason to believe in it. It didn't have any kind of legitimacy at home because the people at the bottom, they've all been watching K dramas for years. They know more or less that the South is completely different. They might speak the same language, but they know that they're culturally different. So it doesn't make sense to the people at the bottom because, as much as it would benefit them, they understand sort of intuitively that that's not going to happen. And it definitely doesn't benefit the people at the top because the people at the top want to be alive and be in power. And they want the regime to continue for obvious reasons. So they're not going to let it fall apart. And so, yeah, it's the reunification dream, or the talk of it, even sort of as a theory, is dead. You talked interestingly about the North Korean cycle where they would sort of, do these very bellicose gestures, throw some missiles around, talk in sort of a cruel way about the South, maybe. And then there would be some negotiations, and the West would come to the table, and they would extract some negotiations or concessions from the West in exchange for ceasing the tests. That's dead. So that method of geopolitics is dead, and the reason that it's dead is because North Korea has thoroughly thrown itself behind its two traditional sugar daddies of China and the Russian Federation. We've been asked to talk a lot about what was happening in the war in Ukraine, so we'll talk a bit more about that later, but obviously recognizing the Russian breakaway republics in eastern Ukraine indicated that they were throwing in their lot permanently with Russia. And so that means that they don't need to do the nuclear diplomacy as much, the nuclear blackmail, because they can just get stuff imported as aid. It'll be called trade, but really it's aid. It's hand-me-downs from China and Russia to keep the regime afloat. So there's no threat anytime soon of the Kim dynasty falling. There's no threat anytime soon of the Workers' Party regime falling. And so this gives the regime a level of stability it hasn't had since the Kim Il-sung era, and that's why they have been reverting since 2022 and the party congress early in 2022, so 3 years ago now, to the Kim Il-sung era policies. So they clearly they haven't resurrected the public distribution system, but they do have some degree of rationing. The government has re-established some level of control over what the citizenry is able to access. They've had an extreme cultural crackdown on those K-dramas, on that content and media from the South. And on top of that, they have completely ossified, and I would like to even say mummified, as it were, the economic and development system. They're not interested in development anymore and sort of anything outside of military technology. They're not interested particularly in economic growth. They're not particularly interested in the capabilities of the domestic clandestine black market to drive innovation. They want things stable, stagnant, and controlled for the benefit of the party elite and the Kim dynasty. And that's what they're getting because they can do that with a powerful Korean People's Army backed with endless Chinese and Russian aid. And that's what they have now.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen a rapid development in the DPRK arms industry. I mean, people, longtime subscribers of the channel will remember my analysis of I believe it was the 2020 Workers' Party of Korea, the parade, and they showed off a bunch of modern military equipment, theater restricted ballistic missiles, UAVs, a brand new main battle tank, which has since entered full scale production. I mean, it's you know, my last sort of investigative journalism piece was, you know, North Korea's acquiring more MiG 29s as well as domestic production of MiG 29. So yeah, it's clear that they are receiving, you know, a significant military aid from China and Russia, if not directly, at least in the form of raw materials, knockdown kits, or the technical know-how, the machinery to make them. So,
and in this sense, I think it's important not to underestimate the DPRK's role as a strategic partner, as an arms supplier for wars. So, you know, people have talked very much about the possibility of Korean People's Army soldiers in eastern Ukraine. Okay, I still remain very skeptical of that. I haven't seen a lot of proof of that. But what I will tell you is I am definitely certain that North Korean munitions have been used by the Russian armed forces because the Russian Federation's military supply chain has had to be stood up extremely powerfully to maintain the war, and I'm sure that it has been brought to it, like, sort of its the edges of its capabilities. So they're always needing more firepower. They're always needing more ordnance, and in this sense, it's very helpful to have the DPRK there as a supplier of shells, ordnance, explosives, weapons. So in that sense, I know that North Korean munitions and weapons have been used for sure. I just still remain very doubtful and dubious of North Korean soldiers on the ground. Like, we really have not seen good proof of that. And at the end of the day, you know, in military engagements, sooner or later people get captured, and we just haven't seen any particularly convincing case of a KPA soldier in Ukrainian custody, which would have happened by now. So, but, you know, North Korean munitions, that's very helpful. And, you know, in this sense, I think that they give more value to the Russians and their war than to the Chinese. But the Chinese and the North Koreans, as we know, they have very tense relations, both for political reasons and for historical reasons, because of the, you know, eternal rivalry, I think, that existed between Chozan and the Chinese emperors. So they do have sort of that shakier relationship, but now the Chinese are kind of realizing, yeah, we need them and they're not going away, so we're going to back them. But, you know, this is interesting because the Chinese have also been notoriously warm and friendly with South Korea for a long time now. So we're going to have to see how this plays out, because now they're also being warm and pretty much indefinitely supporting the North. So we'll have to see how that.
But the interesting thing also was that the Russian Federation, since the collapse of the Soviet Union, has also been relatively friendly with South Korea. And as I mentioned before, quite often selling them arms and arms technology, right? Like the foundation of South Korea's ballistic missile or anti-aircraft systems are built using Russian technology. So it's interesting that Russia has seen this sort of, well, I mean, like, much like with China and Taiwan, it's kind of understood that you can do business with one of the two Koreas, but not both. So it's interesting to see Russia sort of effectively sever its relationship with South Korea with this rapid rapprochement with the North.
Yep. Well, in some ways, they have a war right now that they view as being very existential, in which they want to win. I don't want to get too much into the war, but, you know, clearly they want to win it. So they've decided that if that means they ride with the Kims, then they ride with the Kims. So, you know, and whatever that might bring, it might bring. And, you know, to South Korea's credit, it's not like they've slept on their laurels. They kind of moved on from one ally and moved into the next one's house immediately, because they've been famous for selling huge amounts of armaments and munitions to Poland and to other areas that view themselves as within the zone of threat from the Russian Federation. So it is kind of ironic that that's now happening. And so, yes, you could see very soon missile technology, ballistic missiles being used in places like Poland to defend against Russia that are based on Russian technology. But hey, what is poetic if not the great game of war?
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I mean, that's a good point too. Obviously, I mean, you can also make the case that South Korea has chosen to sever its relationship with Russia by supplying this technology to Poland and whatnot. So, yeah. Um, so, insofar as Korean People's Army troops in Ukraine, do you so I want to be more specific about your statement. So, do you believe that the KPA is not involved in any capacity at all, like logistics or maybe signals intelligence, or are you just saying exclusively frontline troops?
Yeah, we haven't seen proof of frontline troops. In terms of them being involved in the back, in the rear echelon, and in the rear areas, it's possible. We haven't seen proof of it. It's certainly possible. I'm not going to say yay or nay. In terms of them, like having observers, military advisors, military observers, yes, the KPA is definitely involved in the same way that NATO officers involved. A variety of Ukrainian operational plans were 100% drawn up by NATO officers. The summer offensive that was very ill-fated in summer of 2023 was very clearly drawn up by NATO officers in Brussels and overseen by them as well, at least at certain portions of the operational engagement. It ended horribly, but sort of going in, I think everybody who was not part of NAFO sort of knew that that was going to be a disaster going in, and sort of where it was going to be a disaster, because the Ukrainian armed forces did not have enough manpower or munitions or anything to breach the extremely deep Russian entrenchments. They then proceeded to not breach the deep Russian entrenchments, and
Yeah,
it was a disaster. And sort of the war, at least in the collective West, has more or less been memory hold. Or when it's not been memory hold, at least in North America, it's been in the talks of we need to cut them off, or should we cut them off, or at what speed shall they be cut off? So obviously, with Trump in the White House, the talks of that seem to be accelerating. I remain dubious as to whether it's going to happen. I don't think we're going to stop backing them anytime soon, but we'll have to see. But the point is that NATO was involved with the Ukrainian armed forces. So I don't see any reason to believe that the Korean People's Army was not involved in some capacity assisting the Russians. It's just that the Russians lead their show. If they have the KPA or, as well as the PLA, and the PLA is 100% they're observing, learning lessons for their next war, because you'd be crazy not to.
yeah,
They really are an advisory capacity with the Ukrainian armed forces. I think the roles are more switched, where the Ukrainian officer corps oftentimes is more, at least for the early stage of the war, was enacting plans drawn up by NATO on the ground. I'm sure that people who are very pro-Ukraine are going to accuse me of stuff. I don't really think that that makes sense, because, institutions that have been sort of mouthpieces for NATO policy, such as the Institute for the I think it's called the Institute for the Study of War. They more or less had the operational plan for that summer offensive and how it was seen as going down. That's an organization that's very close with the U.S. military intelligence.
Dude, like CNN had plans of that attack, because I remember just how televised that offensive was going to be before it even happened. And my whole thing is like, do these people not know what operational security is at all? Like, you think the Russians don't know about this if you're talking about it on cable news television?
I mean, in terms of the hilarity and smallness of the internet too, there's also the excellent meme lord known as Wow Mao, who has a Discord that airman who stole a bunch of state secrets just dumped it onto one day because he was a Russian sympathizer or something. So that's where the memes really do become just stranger than fiction. That was an example where, again, the sort of information that was contained in those documents that were leaked was, as it was a national secret. I don't think anybody is praising what that young man did, and it's a shame that he threw away such a life and a career to do that. But I do find it ironic that pretty much everything that was contained in those leaks, as far as I'm aware, I'm just reporting on what CNN knows. it wasn't really anything outside of what organizations like CNN or the Institute for the Study of War or people on Twitter sort of were aware of to begin with. So
Yeah, exactly.
um,
Because it's like
yeah,
from any YouTube channel or anything covering the war before the offensive, it always was like, oh yes, this offensive is going to try and cut off the Crimean Peninsula from the Donbass and the places in the east, and it's like, again, even from the start, I'm like, do you really want to be televising that? Like,
apparently they did. I mean, they had a trailer and they were very proud of the trailer, and then it has since been memory hold. So
yeah,
um, it did not go well. Obviously, that war seems like it's going to be fought to its bitter and bloody conclusion over the period of God knows how much longer. But in the meantime, it's clear, at least to me, that NATO officers remain involved in operational planning and staging, and they're observing it because they're not dumb. They are soldiers, and they want to learn the lessons of the next war. And the next war may very well come against the Russian armed forces. And the KPA and the PLA are there too, behind the Russian lines, probably learning things and liaising with their counterparts and
wow.
studying things.
What do you think?
So that's not to be that shouldn't be surprising to anybody. I think.
Yeah, I don't think it is for anybody who has a running knowledge of how wars and things work like that. Major powers are going to want to see how contemporary wars are fought. What about special forces though? Do you think that the NKSOF is I mean, it is an opportunity for we could discuss whether or not certain NATO special forces have been active in Ukraine with or without patches, right? So I mean,
what the heck did you just freaking say about me, you filthy imperialist bastard? I'll have you know, I graduated top of my class in the Korean People's Army Special Forces Academy, and I have been involved in over 300 clandestine raids across the DMZ.
I'm just saying, like,
no, I know. Like, what about the NKSOF?
I'm like, do you think like they would have had? I mean, it is an opportunity to get like actual.
As I said, like, I think this is an area where there would be not much secrets that could be made of it. You'd recover bodies with DPRK information on it, or you'd capture one of these people live sooner or later, no matter how hardcore they are. Like, sooner or later, one of them's going to be knocked out by a shell blast by pure dumb luck and picked up by the Ukrainians. So, and we just haven't seen it yet. I've seen lots of Asiatic-looking troops, but there's a lot of
Asiatic peoples in Russia.
Yeah, poor Asiatic peoples who wanted the pay in the front lines, because let's not forget the pay in the front lines might be anywhere between 5 and 10 times what the salaries in those parts of Russia are. So,
and let's also not forget that there is not an insubstantial Korean population in the Russian Far East either. So it's like, yeah, yes, you can have actual Koreans who are Russians who sound like North Koreans, but they're not. So it's like,
yeah, I just haven't seen any convincing proof of like KPA soldiers, right? So, and let's also not be silly here, right? Which is that a lot of the time, there are defectors, and as ideologically trained as these guys may be, one of them might be captured and sort of be deprogrammed, or one of them might eventually say, you know what, screw this, like I've had it enough with this, and I'm gonna walk over and roll the dice, see what happens. And if that happens, people like that talk, when we've had a variety of high-profile defectors, and they always talk, they always blab, they always give you their story, and they always tell you sort of their opinion on the DPRK, which, for very understandable reasons, tends to be quite negative.
Yeah, no, of course. Yeah, we've covered that a million times, right? So it's always the most it's always the stories that tend to tug at your heart the most that seem to receive the most attention, right? So,
yes.
And nobody knows that more than North Korean defectors. So
absolutely, and on top of that, they have been through a harrowing experience. They've grown up in a regime and in a society that is about as far as can be imagined from any of us comfortable Westerners sitting here can possibly imagine. So
sure. Yeah, no, definitely. Okay, I want to pivot here to inter-Korean relations because I have an interesting, or perhaps it's an interesting question. So, if North Korea has more or less thrown the idea of reunification publicly to the wind and, more or less said, okay, we're going to be our own distinct, Korean identity, and we're going to be our own sovereign nation, does this mean that it necessarily still has to be hostile to South Korea? Because, I mean, if it's giving up all of its claims, I mean, by giving up your reunification, you're more or less, okay, like we're giving up all of our claims of South Korean land. And, I mean, is there an opportunity maybe for a working relationship with the South at some point in the future, maybe after this war ends, or are they still going to be ideologically forced to view the South as an enemy?
Well, that's a great question, and I think it comes in two parts. I'd be really curious to hear sort of what your opinions on this are as well. But for my money, the issue here is now one of sort of big geopolitics rather than small geopolitics. Like the small geopolitics would be north to south, and I, I think for 30 years now we've seen that the north and south are okay with having a somewhat friendly relationship, but the North, for very obvious reasons, cannot allow Southerners to come in en masse. Because if they come in en masse, they're coming in with Choco Pies, they're coming in with Samsung smartphones, they're coming in Canada Goose jackets. Like the factor to which they are wealthier than the North Korean normie is just astounding. It's staggering. At the absolute most positive and most optimistic, they're probably 10 times richer. And to put things into perspective, an East German was on a good day about half as wealthy as a West German. So,
Yeah,
right, like we're going up multiple factors, and it's probably worse than 10 times, by the way.
I was gonna say I think it's like anywhere from 10 to 12 times. Last time I checked, which was some time ago, it's probably gotten worse since then. So
yeah, so it's not good. So for very obvious reasons, they can't be allowed up there. But in terms of the big geopolitical question, there's the big geopolitical question, which is that yeah, like the North and the South are aligned with different power blocks. The South is a very pragmatic member of the Pan-Western Alliance, but it remains a member of the Pan-Western Alliance. The Marines are in the South. There are American troops in the South. South Koreans routinely go to the United States to study and to the collective West to study, and they enjoy very friendly passport relationships with all Western nations. And in terms of soft power, I think that I don't need to say anything more than the letters BTS to get an idea for just how, or Squid Game, as the case may be, for an idea for just how powerful South Korean culture is in the collective West. Like it's in the public imagination. It's a place that's viewed with an extreme level of positivity, I think, by the West, and that is threatening to the North. And the North is a member of now sort of that China-Russia power bloc. So it's opposed to our power bloc as a collective whole, and so I think it's going to remain there. And then you also brought up the question of ideology, and I think the question of ideology is very key because at its core, they have not abandoned the socialist identity. It's gone through so many permutations, and it's very, very hard to identify or even see sort of the common lineage with Marxism, Leninism, but the lineage is there. And they see themselves as a socialist country, and they see the South as a capitalist country, and they see capitalism as somewhat immoral. And don't get me wrong, like people in the North are not living socialism. Like the party elite has Starbucks coffee and Hennessy cognac. Like let's not be silly here. But it doesn't matter because this is a question of identity. And if you're brought up on the identity of the great leader Comrade Kim Il Sung led the Korean masses to overthrow the imperialists, which these people do believe in their heart of hearts, I think. Then that's a part of identity where even if it didn't happen and it wasn't true, and it didn't happen and it wasn't true, then you're never going to really beat that out of them entirely. They're always going to have that sense in them. In the same way that a Catholic atheist raised Catholic is always going to have sort of Catholic cultural tells that somebody who is a Protestant atheist raised Protestant will not. It's just that's how cultural backgrounds and sort of socialization work.
okay, that's a very comprehensive answer. For me, it's like I feel like okay, because let's think for a minute here. If North Korea is giving up, the idea of reunification, you're also right in the sense that I was going to say this that they still probably can't allow South Koreans to have any real interactions with North Korean people. Like opening up is not a possibility here. Or they're going to be like, well, shit, like this is what we've been missing. Don't get me wrong, North Koreans obviously know what they're missing to a large extent, but I mean, like to actually see it with your own eyes in person, I think that would be a deal breaker. So I do still feel like even though the regime has given up on the idea of South Koreans like being like destitute and poor, we need to liberate them. I still feel like there needs to be some sort of reason as to there still needs to be some sort of like call it artificial, but there needs to be some reason as to why they're still viewed with some sense of hostility, right? So because obviously, South Korea has always been viewed as sort of like a U.S. puppet regime, and I'm just curious of like if they're giving up on reunification, if they're giving up that line of talk, then what is South Korea to these people? Is it still a U.S. puppet regime, or is it, its own? Is it its own distinct identity now? Is it its own? Is it a sovereign state now? And I'm just curious as to how they're gonna spin that to their people going forward.
Yeah, that's complicated. I mean, I bet you that it's going to be Schrodinger's case based on the political needs. So if South Korea will be the imperialist puppet regime of the West when they need to be the imperialist puppet regime of the West, and they will be, our independent Korean cousins whom we like talking to, but we look down upon their moral infirmities in the capitalist way when they need to talk to them. I would imagine it'll be some sort of mix of that, and then that's sort of a seesaw, and they'll vacillate between some variation of either of those positions.
Yeah, yeah, fair enough. I mean, that's kind of like just a modified form of what they're already doing, right? Because it's like you do see North Korea throwing its support for South Korea over issues like the Dokdo Islands, for example, where they have an island dispute with the Japanese. Like, so I mean, there is, I think, some sort of like pan-Korean nationalism that still unites the DMZ on certain issues, and I don't see that changing regardless of, geopolitics. But
Yeah, there will always be ethnic solidarity, and I don't think I'm surprising anybody when I say if we ever see a World Cup soccer game and it's DPR Korea versus Japan, I think we all know who South Koreans are cheering for.
yeah, I mean, harkening back to that poll they did a few years ago where they asked South Koreans if a war broke out between the DPRK and Japan, who would you support? And it was like 71% chose North Korea.
This is really not surprising. This is how they feel.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, no, so ethnic solidarity does go a long way, but also like yeah, the idea of like a Korean confederation or something like that is just completely unrealistic. I mean, it
Yeah,
remained
that's dead.
yeah. I mean, that was something that was sort of existed in the mind of Kim Il Sung back when the North had a was the more prosperous of the two Koreas. That sort of died with him, I think, and it's not going to be resurrected.
Yeah, I mean, it's not when the South is 10 times wealthier at minimum. There's no way. Now, just the interesting question, which is if for some reason the North does wind up collapsing, which I don't think is very likely because they have total political control. But in the amazing scenario where they go down and the PLA tanks don't roll in to bail out the regime, then I think that's probably your only chance that you're going to see for reunification from the South. And it's going to be, I think the South really does not relish the chances of dealing with that because they're going to have to pay for that, for the equalization, and they're going to have to do that with a extremely small tax base, a very high level of debt, and a very, very old population whose productivity is already being squeezed like to the boundaries of its reasonable capabilities right now.
Yeah, I just I don't think the Chinese Communist Party would let North Korea collapse. I think if it were truly on the brink, well, because first of all, I think something like a coup or like a just the some fragment of the KPA overrunning Pyongyang is like what happened in Syria is completely as fantasy personally. So I mean, like I think the moment that the CCP sees like okay, this regime is on the verge of collapsing, yeah, you're gonna see the PLA rolling into Pyongyang, right? And like we're here to help our Korean compatriots and shit like that. I really don't see the North collapsing.
No, no. I'm saying this is like that's the only in my opinion that extremely unlikely scenario is which is the reunification by absorption by the South is the only one that could even possibly happen. Like the other ones are not going to happen. So, for example, one of the ones that the North Korean elite used to always fantasize about at night on summer days was the reunification by force. We've probably seen that in movies like Iron Sky. Like, we're going to liberate the South, like says the old grizzled KPA general, like living up to the dreams that he had from his youth, right?
Yeah.
And that's not going to happen. I can say pretty confidently that's not going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, even ignoring the United States, I mean, they have half the population. I mean, an aging population at that. They have no domestic oil reserves, really. Yeah, everything that could go against them in a war against South Korea is going against them. So that was never a realistic possibility post like 1970, in my opinion. you could have
Correct. Yeah.
you could have made the case that when the United States was entrenched in the Vietnam War, North Korea could have launched like a blitzkrieg sort of campaign and maybe could have done it. And I know that's what Kim Il Sung considered doing, but backed out when he wasn't going to get foreign support. But I mean, that window's effectively shut now because South Korea can defend itself pretty well.
Yeah. Yeah. South Korea. Yeah. So yeah, no, this is an area where I think we are really in for some interesting times in the coming years. The coalitions and power blocks have really sort of aligned along. They've really aligned now, and people sort of know which side of the divide they lie on. I don't know how else to put it. It's just I don't know if it's going to get any better.
I mean, I think it all depends on Ukraine and maybe also Taiwan and China. If China decides they want to go for it, I mean, we'll see. You know, there are two ways that this can happen. The war in Ukraine could end, however it ends. I mean, I think the West is going to have a rapprochement with Russia eventually. I think it's especially Europe with their energy needs. I think it's kind of inevitable. But it remains to be seen as what's going to go on in East Asia and the Pacific. So, I mean, there's some variables here, and we'll just have to wait and see.
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, we really are going to have to wait and see. All I know is that this definitely is sort of a new nadir. This is a new low point for our relations with the North, and I don't see them getting better anytime soon.
Yeah, and I guess another question is like, hey, the Donald is back in office, and one of his, you know, stunning, one of the very stunning things he did in his first term was he actually went and met Kim Jong Un. Something, went and met a sitting leader. That wasn't something that had been done since Jimmy Carter when he met Kim Il Sung, but Jimmy Carter was obviously out of office at that time. So I mean, I oh, I personally don't think it's very likely. But what do you think about the opportunity of another summit with North Korea?
We're dealing with the Donald here. I don't. If I try to tell that guy's future, I'm gonna screw it up. I can't tell you. I don't know. All I do know is that the jokes that man is playing fourth dimensional chess are probably more or less accurate. Like this guy has now completely violated and overcome pretty much every obstacle in his path. Like didn't get shot. Like I don't know. If you were looking at if this guy was a medieval king and you were reading about his life and story, you would say there is pretty compelling evidence that this guy was being protected by God.
Yeah, dude.
So he could do it. Like it's within the realm of feasibility that he does it again, and it's within the realm of feasibility that he doesn't. All I will say is that he's, from his record so far in office, where a lot has happened in the past couple weeks, even though it feels like a lot more. That guy means business, and he's not going to do anything unless it makes him personally and the United States more generally look powerful and strong as a whole. So yeah. I don't see him ever backing down on things from a country that is fundamentally a dictatorship of a couple tens of millions of people.
Yeah. That's more or less my opinion as well. I was just saying I think it's unlikely simply because like North Korea isn't really too concerned with the United States these days, and that's again due to their sort of rapprochement with the Russians, right? So it's like there hasn't really been much saber rattling at all. Like things have actually like as bad as things are in Eastern Europe with the war in Ukraine. I mean North Korea has been pretty calm, all things considered, towards the West at least.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think they need to bug us. I think that they have what they need, which is that they're going to have an ossified, sort of mummified regime that's stable and non-innovative and that's controllable, and that's what the elite there likes and wants, and that's what they want. So that's what they're going to get. And right now, the United States has a lot more priorities on hand. They've been trying to deal with the Gaza situation. They are dealing with the Chinese. And because, North Korea is now a Chinese proxy, I don't think that bodes too well for their relationship. They're concerned with the war in Ukraine and how to wrap that up. They're dealing with, Canadians such as myself. They're dealing with Mexico. He's basically yelling at all of the European nations that have been very powerfully backing Ukraine to start paying their NATO obligations.
Yeah.
And yeah, so it just doesn't seem like it's at the top of the priority list for this administration right now. They're dealing with other things.
Yeah, like liberating Greenland.
There you go, right? So, I mean, and they're viewing that. Here's the thing: if they view that, and it appears that they do, by all accounts, as an integralist and fundamental part of ensuring national security and sovereignty, then they're going to pursue that with the force and fervor that defending national sovereignty entails.
Yeah.
And they're not going to do that for other places where, okay, yeah, there's North Korea and it's bad, and we have troops in Japan, we have troops in South Korea, but we're more concerned with getting Greenland because we view that as something that should be considered our integral territory.
Yeah. No, definitely.
So,
So, yeah, East Asia, seems to be on the back burner, even with relations with China being what they are. I mean, Trump, again, seems more concerned with Manifest Destiny 2.0 than anything else. So, I mean, that and deporting people. So, hey, it's going to be an interesting 4 years. That's about all I can say.
yep, no, and we're gonna have to find out how long this is going to last. That's the other thing too, which is because he's changed his mind before, and he could change it again, and this regime could have other priorities. So we'll have to find out.
Yeah, we'll just have to wait and see. So, I mean, yeah. So, for everybody listening, this has been our thoughts on, just not just the channel, but on the sort of recent events of the past few years regarding North Korea. And, rest assured, when something big happens, I mean, we'll be here to talk about it. So, yeah, is there anything more you wanted to add, or?
Going to be fascinating to watch where the DPRK goes. I hope that there's more content for the channel for us to analyze this. It's going to be interesting because I think that it really is going to become much more closed off and much less front of mind for a lot of Westerners as we deal with the other sort of geopolitical issues that are coming. But with the sort of rumble with the Chinese brewing, it definitely feels this could become relevant again because they appear, at least right now, to be a very important strategic partner of both the Russians and of the Chinese. So,
Well, here's the thing, though. Like, I've always thought that if there ever was a major war in East Asia, like between China and the United States, I've always been of the opinion that neither Korea would get involved because of that sort of the preservation of our own sovereignty and sort of like, again, pan-Korean nationalism. It's like, North and South Korea, do we really want to fight each other over a war between, China and the United States? Do we really want our country to be a battleground again between major powers? Because that's something that historically Korea has always been, right? Whether it's the Japanese fighting the Chinese or the Russians fighting the Japanese or, part of the reason. Go ahead.
I tend to agree.
Yeah.
I tend to agree with that. But we're going to have to see, right? And also when I say the rumble with the Chinese, like that doesn't necessarily mean we're actually going to have a war. We could not. That also just means that it's just heightened geopolitical tensions, right? Like what happens if some PLA Navy vessels go off the coast of Taiwan and one day to show solidarity, they're joined by a DPRK ship, like a Korean People's Army Navy ship, right? Could happen. Could not happen, right? Yeah. That would be an example of an escalatory action to shore up the alliance on the part of the DPRK. Or it could not happen, in which case it sort of leads to your point. So I don't know which way it's going to go. I definitely tend to agree with you, though. I think that they both have I think both the North and the South have a fairly sober assessment of the relative military strength of the other one. And they don't want to risk rolling everything on sort of limited goals. The North sort of doesn't want to eat the South, and the South very much doesn't want to have to pay for eating the North.
Absolutely, and I also want to say, like, as much as we talk about the North's inability to really deliver a knockout blow to the South, it's also debatable whether or not the South could actually knock out the North because, like, yeah, they don't have as many troops, but I don't know about you, but I would not want to be a South Korean conscript invading that fucking country. No, thank you.
Yeah, no, absolutely not, absolutely not.
So I think you're right. I think for the time being, inter-Korean relations are sort of going to be more or less as they are. Not exactly amicable, but not hostile either. So we'll just have to see. So yeah, I mean, I think that's pretty much everything. Anything else you want to add?
No, I think it's good. And as I said, I just hope we see more things coming up from the channel. It's going to be a fascinating part of the world to observe and take a look at. And it's just been my unique honor and privilege to be able to join you on the show today and to get to collaborate with you and working on these in the past years. It's always been one of the best things that I've been able to do.
Of course, I feel the same way, man. Like, you know, one of the greatest privileges about one of the greatest gifts of this channel is, it. I met you, man. And we've been very good friends ever since, and so I appreciate that.
Hallelujah. Hallelujah.
Yeah. All right, everybody. Thank you for tuning in, and you'll hear more from us very soon. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.